If you want to support the channel, then please check out my Patreon page to gain access to exclusive videos, take part in Q&As, and watch my retrospectives before they go live on YouTube. Like many of the new big releases, Dune has been delayed a number of times over the past 12 months, but it's finally here. There was a lot of talk of it hitting HBO Max and theatres at the same time, which caused a lot of drama in Hollywood, upsetting the director Denis Villeneuve and other big names in the industry such as Christopher Nolan. Denis wrote streaming can produce great content, but not movies of Dune's scope and scale. Warner Brothers' decision means Dune won't have the chance to perform financially in order to be viable, and piracy will ultimately triumph. My team and I devoted more than 3 years of our lives to make it a unique big screen experience, but Warner Brothers wouldn't back down in efforts to push their streaming service, so for the USA it's been released in theatres and on HBO Max. For countries that didn't have the streaming service, it was released a month before in Europe, for example, during September. Costing in a region of $170 million, the film will need to generate a healthy profit for the studio to continue with part 2 of the story, as the director couldn't cram the entire book into one film, like David Lynch did back in 1984, which suffered as a result. Once Villeneuve was on board to direct Dune, he stated that his goal was to adapt the novel into a 2-part film series, very much in the same style as the 2-part adaptation of Stephen King's It in 2017 and in 2019. He stated that Dune was too complex that a single film would fail to capture. While Villeneuve had seen Lynch's adaptation of Dune, he respected both Lynch and the film, but did not expect to build upon any elements from that, saying that I'm going back to the book and going to the images that came out when I read it when he was a teenager. Villeneuve's reaction to Lynch's adaptation was that there was parts that he loved and other elements that he was less comfortable with. He remembered being half satisfied, and that there was still a movie that needed to be made about the book, just with a different sensibility. With this new adaptation, Villeneuve wanted to reflect on realities that have happened related to overexploitation of the Earth, and considered his screenplay a coming-of-age story, but also a call for action for the youth, including alterations to some of the arcs of the female characters in the book, and also wanted to move the Baron Vladimir Harkonnen from being a caricature as he was presented in the novel to a more complex antagonist. Set in the far future of 10,191, Duke Leto Atreides accepts the duty of mining the spice on the dangerous desert planet Arrakis, known as Dune, which is also home to giant sandworms. The spice is the most valuable substance in the universe, a drug that extends human life, provides superhuman levels of thought, and makes travelling at light speed across space possible. Leto knows this position is a trap set by his enemies. He takes his lady Jessica and his son Paul to Arrakis to get production of the spice back on track. Paul has been having visions of a young girl on Arrakis with blue eyes and questions his future on the planet. Their enemies, the Harkonnens, who are forced to leave the planet by the Emperor as they were becoming too powerful, want to take back control and are conspiring to plan their attack and kill the Duke. Now, I love science fiction, so I was looking forward to seeing the new adaptation of Dune. Denis Villeneuve is an amazing director. Arrival and Blade Runner 2049 are fantastic films, so I knew Dune would look amazing, there's no question about that. The funny thing is that because I'm very familiar with David Lynch's version from 1984, and I also started reading the original book during the summer, which I've not finished yet, I do find it a tough read, but I am familiar with its story, so going into the film, I was foolishly expecting something very different. Shortly into the movie, it was following the exact same story beats as Lynch's version. Which of course it would, because it's an adaptation of the book. It's not going to deviate too far from the source material. So there was no real surprises for me. So it felt like a movie I had seen before, but it had an expensive new lick of paint and adjustments here and there to the characters. It was certainly enough to warrant watching it, especially if you love Dune. And for those who are totally new to it, then they will be wowed by its production values and the world that Denis and the production team have created. But it was a strange experience for me watching it, and I also don't think Dune is for everyone. Now, the 1984 film was heavily criticised at the time for being confusing and difficult to follow with its story. They threw on a prologue to explain what the spice is, and who are the families governing the planets under the rule of the Emperor of the universe, and the Fremen who live on Dune and their belief of a messiah that would free them and lead them on a new path. So a lot of information to take in. Then you have loads of characters who are introduced with strange names you have to remember, and at its core it's a political struggle to gain control of the spice. It's not an action-adventure film, it's a political drama set in the future with religious themes thrown in. so anyone going in expecting something like Star Wars was very disappointed. It was a slow movie that had strange body horror elements to it, with a mix of experimental visuals. Not everyone's cup of tea and not easy to watch. Now, this new version visually is very different to Lynch's 1984 film. Tonally it's a lot different as well. It's not played so seriously, there is elements of humour to lighten the mood, some of the characters are given more screen time, and in some cases others have been reduced. To avoid confusing the audience, the script does streamline a lot of the dialogue and makes it easier to follow. Now, for hardcore fans, the amount of information provided and lengthy dialogue and what could be perceived as a somewhat of a confusing story, it would seem very clear to them, but to a general audience it can be tough to follow. So I credit the writers for finding a nice balance of adapting what's in the book and adjusting the dialogue so the characters felt more human and relatable. The relationship between Paul and his parents feels more natural, and Paul's relationship with Duncan is far stronger. And also Duncan gets more screen time to demonstrate his skills as a warrior. The new version of Dune scraps the inner monologues that dominated Lynch's version, which I think was wise, as it was a bit confusing when watching it, as some characters could communicate telepathically, so it made it unclear if others could hear them, or it was just in their head. The villains, the Arconans, whose name is pronounced differently in this version, with Arcanans. Did the 1984 film pronounce it wrong? No idea. Stellan Skarsgård is really good as the Baron. His role is somewhat reduced in this update. I imagine him having a bigger role in part 2, but he is less over the top and crazy, far more unpredictable, and like a very seedy politician who is pulling the strings behind the scenes and lying to those who trust him. The villains still retain a sense of being alien and creepy. The David Lynch approach has been completely dialed back to keep it in the sci-fi roots, and less of the horror or just plain weird stuff of Lynch's interpretation has been removed. The Emperor's personal army have this really eerie sound on their world when they communicate. It plays up the bigger threat that is coming for the Atreides. There are parts of the 1984 film I think are better than the remake. I think that film is more visually interesting, especially with the different houses with the Emperor's throne room, the Arconans and Atreides homeworlds. The detail is crazy and very elaborate. This new one is certainly great to look at, but more subtle and slick and less glamorous, you could say. Granted, everything looks bigger in its scale, but personally I like the mix of cultures in the Lynch version that produce some wonderful eye candy. The first half of the book, or say part 1 of this movie, there isn't really much action. The new one does make attempts to offer a bit more in areas. The spectacle is there, especially the attack on the Atreides on Dune. The 1984 film had very clunky action scenes that seemed a bit jumbled and incoherent. But in all, there isn't much on offer for those looking for some crazy explosive action. That's all intended for part 2. Hans Zimmer composed a score to Dune. After working on Blade Runner 2049, Denis wanted him back for his next feature. Zimmer was a big fan of the book and chose not to work with Christopher Nolan on Tenet, wanting to work on Dune, which was more personal to him. Zimmer was inspired to look at the film's music in a different way, to take the audience on a journey beyond the movie, and felt it must be available via an immersive technology in order to fully showcase the unique sounds of the soundtrack. Villeneuve said Zimmer spent months and months creating new instruments, defining, creating and seeking new sounds, pushing the envelope, and praised his work on the film. One of the best things of David Lynch's version is the score by the band Toto. Incredible piece of music and one of the most fondly remembered parts of the film. Hans Zimmer doesn't ignore what Toto did. He doesn't bring back those themes, of course, but takes on a familiar style. We've got the synth, the electric guitars, and fully expands the scope of the sound, creating some of his best work for years. Seeing it in the cinema, the music does an incredible job pulling you into the world of Dune. The visuals are epic, and the music equally matches it. This is a good film, there's no doubt about that. It's certainly a better adaptation than Lynch's 1984 attempt, because it has the benefit of being split into 2 movies, but also Denis is a better fit for the source material, having already directed 2 well-received sci-fi films. The genre is in his wheelhouse. For Lynch, however, it's not his forte, and he has somewhat disowned his movie since making it. He considers it the worst film of his career. He was battling the studio and producers with his vision, and struggled to get what he wanted. Despite him being a great director, I think he was the wrong guy for the material. I felt more invested in this new adaptation compared to the original movie. The casting is spot on, and the performances will keep you interested. But once you get to the third act with Paul and his mum out in the desert, I was starting to tune out a bit, feeling it was dragging on. I think maybe 15 minutes could have been trimmed to create something tighter, and with a quicker pace in areas. Despite the hype and the names involved with the cast and those behind the camera, The film is not for everyone. I'm not including myself in that group. I like the story and its world, but I'm sure some will wonder what the fuss is all about and may find the experience of watching it a bit heavy-handed. The book is considered the greatest sci-fi story ever written, but because many films and even TV shows have been inspired by Dune over the years, it makes it tough to offer something more than what has already been explored before. Dune is epic, clear with its story, has a fantastic score and wonderfully directed, but lacked many surprises for me. I am looking forward to part 2 however, and I just hope this performs well for them to proceed with the conclusion to this epic tale. Some may find the movie boring and slow, but it's great to see smart sci-fi stories on the big screen with money well spent. And Dune deserved a great adaptation, and I think Denis Villeneuve has managed to achieve that. Make sure to see it on the big screen because watching on your TV won't do it justice.